Come with me. The millionaire single dad found a disabled girl crying in the rain and took her home. That day, everything changed. The snow fell like feathers, thick and endless, covering the streets of suburban Colorado in a hush only winter could conjure. It was Christmas Eve, but instead of twinkling lights and joyful carols, the city was blanketed in cold silence and shimmering white. Nathaniel Rowan gripped the steering wheel as his black SUV inched through traffic. His 5-year-old daughter, Susan, sat in the back, humming softly to herself, a gingerbread cookie clutched in her mittened hands. The road ahead was blocked. An accident, perhaps, forcing Nathaniel to turn off into a quieter street near the edge of a city park. Snow crunched under the tires as they rolled down the narrow lane. Then Susan's voice broke the silence. "Daddy, stop." Nathaniel's brow furrowed. "What is it, sweetheart?" She pressed her tiny hand to the window. "There's a lady under the tree." He slowed the car. Under a withered pine tree, slumped over in an old wheelchair, was a woman, young, fragile-looking. Her long blonde hair damp with snow. Her arms wrapped tightly around a torn paper bag, an old leather suitcase by her side. Her shoulders shook, not from the cold, but from sobs as silent as the snow around her. She flinched, only then looking at him, startled, eyes wide, as if she hadn't expected anyone to notice she existed. "I'm not asking questions," Nathaniel said softly, voice calm despite the sting of the cold air. "But you cannot stay out here." She opened her mouth, but no sound came. He glanced back at Susan, who had already climbed out of the car and was now standing beside them, her boots barely making a sound in the snow. The little girl looked at the woman with wide, sincere eyes. Then she reached out her mittened hand and smiled. "I think my mommy sent you to us," Susan said simply. The woman's lips parted. Her face crumpled. She began to cry openly now, the kind of tears that couldn't be held back anymore. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He carefully scooped her into his arms. Her body was cold, too light, like she'd been living on nothing. She held the bag tightly to her chest, not letting go. As he carried her toward the SUV, snow fell heavier. Susan opened the back door, scooting over to make space. "She can sit with me," she said cheerfully, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Nathaniel gently placed the woman in the back seat, adjusting his scarf around her neck before buckling her in. He returned to the driver's seat, glancing once more in the mirror. The woman leaned her head against the frosted window, eyes closed, breath trembling. Susan reached out, slipping her tiny hand into the woman's frozen fingers. Nathaniel started the car and drove off into the white. And Annalise Monroe, who had nothing left, no home, no family, no warmth, did not yet realize that snowy night would not be the end. It would be the beginning. She didn't know it yet, but that moment under the dead pine tree, in the quiet snowfall, and the soft voice of a stranger saying, "Come with me," would change everything for her and for the man whose heart had been frozen for 5 long winters. The scent of cinnamon and pine hung softly in the air. Annalise stirred beneath thick, unfamiliar blankets, her fingers brushing warm flannel sheets. The room was softly lit, the fireplace across from her bed flickering low with dying embers. She blinked. For a moment she wasn't sure where she was. Then she heard a small gasp. "She's awake!" Susan burst into view, her arms flying around Annalise before she could even sit up. The hug was clumsy, tight, and filled with the kind of uninhibited love only a child could give. Annalise winced slightly. Her body ached, but she didn't pull away. "I knew you were a snow angel," Susan whispered into her shoulder. "Daddy said you just needed rest." Annalise looked over the girl's head, seeing the edges of a grand room. Ornate molding, high ceilings, bookshelves filled with hardcovers, a crystal snow globe perched near the window. Outside, the snow was still falling. She cleared her throat. "Where's your father?" As if on cue, Nathaniel appeared at the door, still in his suit pants and a dark sweater. He carried a tray with a steaming cup of tea and a small bowl of soup. He paused when their eyes met, then gave a polite nod. "You're safe here," he said gently. No one's going to ask you to explain anything you're not ready to. She hesitated. I'll leave once the snow stops. He didn't push. He simply placed the tray on the side table and handed her a folded piece of paper before stepping back. Once he left the room, Annalise opened it. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. If you need silence, I'll give you that. But if you need a place to start again, there's space here. And the words struck something deep in her. In the days that followed, the snow did not stop. It thickened, blanketed the world in silence. But inside the Rowan home, there was life. Annalise remained quiet, polite. She moved between the guest room and the living room, always in her chair, always trying not to take up space. But Susan would not let her disappear. The little girl followed her like a shadow, always talking, always drawing. She began sketching pictures, simple, sweet, childish portraits of 3 people, a man, a girl, and a woman in a wheelchair. This one is you, Susan said proudly, pointing at the golden-haired figure. You're the fairy in the snow. Annalise had to look away. One afternoon, while Nathaniel was on a business call upstairs, Susan wandered outside to the back garden without a coat. The snow was softer now, but deep enough to hide a child if no one was watching. Annalise, reading quietly near the fireplace, looked up and realized the little girl was no longer in the room. Panic tightened her chest. Susan! No response. She wheeled herself toward the back door, calling again, louder. Susan! Still nothing. Her breath quickened. Without a second thought, Annalise flung the door open and pushed herself outside. The cold slapped her face. The ramp was slippery, but she didn't care. She rolled into the snow, wheels crunching through the fresh powder. Her fingers ached. Her chest burned. Her scarf fluttered away. Susan! Finally, near the edge of the garden, she spotted a small figure crouched near a bush, crying. Annalise pushed herself harder, her arms trembling. When she reached Susan, she grabbed her in an embrace so fierce and desperate, she nearly collapsed. Sweetheart, you're okay. You're okay? She whispered, her voice cracking. She pressed her cheek against the girl's cold hair, tears freezing on her own face. Susan looked up, eyes wet. I got lost. I know, baby. I know. But I found you. She held her close, rocking slightly, her legs numb, her heart pounding. Behind them, footsteps crunched. Nathaniel had come running outside, breathless, eyes wide. He froze at the sight before him, Annalise holding Susan in the snow, her body trembling, her cheeks raw from wind and tears. For a long moment, he just stood there. Gratitude swelled in his chest. But it wasn't only that. Watching her like this, braving the cold, the pain, the fear, he felt something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Not pity, not admiration, but the beginning of something much deeper. That night, as the fire crackled low and Susan curled up on the couch with a blanket and cocoa, Nathaniel watched Annalise from across the room. She was silent again, but different, not withdrawn, just calm, present. He realized then, in that moment under the falling snow, when she chose love over comfort, instinct over safety, Annalise was no longer just a stranger in need. She was someone who would risk pain for someone else's child, someone brave. In that moment, Annalise was no longer the girl everyone had looked at with pity. She was someone who chose love over fear, someone who could still save and be saved. Snow still blanketed the world outside, but within the Rowan house, the cold had begun to thaw in more ways than one. The fireplace crackled steadily. Cinnamon rolls baked in the oven, and laughter, light, bright, innocent, bounced off the walls of the once quiet home. Susan sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by colorful sheets of paper. Annalise guided her small fingers through the delicate folds of a paper flower. Like this? Susan asked, squinting in concentration. Annalise smiled softly. Perfect. Just tuck the edge here. Now twist. There you go. The result was a slightly lopsided paper rose, but Susan beamed as if she had created a masterpiece. Can I make one for Mommy? I mean, for her picture, she asked suddenly. Annalise looked up, surprised. Susan was already reaching for a crayon, flipping to a page in her sketchbook. It was a drawing, a child's memory brought to life, a woman with long brown hair, wearing a blue scarf, holding Susan's hand. "That's how I remember her," Susan said quietly. "Daddy says I have her eyes." Annalise placed a gentle hand over Susan's. "She'd be proud of you," she whispered. In the doorway, Nathaniel stood still, out of sight. His eyes lingered not on the paper, but on his daughter's face, so full of joy. It had been years since he'd heard her laugh like this, not the forced kind to please him, but real, bubbling joy. And it was because of the woman in the wheelchair. Later that evening, while Annalise read by the window, Susan ran to her with something small wrapped in red ribbon. "Daddy made something for you," she announced proudly. Annalise opened the little box to find a silver bell, delicate, elegant, attached to a leather strap. "It's for your chair," Susan said, already moving to help her fasten it. "So I'll always know when you're coming." Annalise turned to Nathaniel, who stood nearby, pretending to look busy with his phone. He didn't meet her eyes, but there was a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Thank you," she said, voice soft but sincere. "It was Susan's idea," he replied. She didn't correct him. She just let the silence between them sit warm, peaceful. The next evening, the three of them sat down to dinner, a simple meal, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, steamed carrots. But Nathaniel had done something different. He'd adjusted the entire dining table setup. The chairs had been moved, and the table itself had been slightly raised on wooden blocks so Annalise's wheelchair could slide under comfortably. There was no comment made, no grand gesture. It had just been done. She noticed immediately. He didn't acknowledge it, didn't look for thanks. But when she glanced at him across the table, their eyes met. She smiled. He nodded barely. Little by little, the cold inside her was melting. On the third evening, Nathaniel surprised them both. "There's a holiday market tonight in the old town square," he said casually. "They're lighting the big tree. Would you two like to go?" Susan jumped up. Yes, yes, yes. Annalise hesitated. "I don't want to, she wants to go with you," Nathaniel interrupted gently. "And so do I." She met his gaze, and something unspoken passed between them. The town square sparkled with golden lights and evergreen garlands. Snow fell gently, like it had rehearsed. The air was filled with scents of roasted chestnuts and hot cocoa. People wandered between stalls, bundled in scarves and mittens. Music floated from a live quartet playing near the center. Annalise watched Susan dash from one booth to another, pointing at ornaments and handmade dolls. Nathaniel stayed close, always watching, always alert. Annalise trailed behind, smiling, really smiling. Then it happened. The quartet began to play a familiar tune, soft, slow, hauntingly beautiful. "Sleep, my child, and peace attend thee." Annalise froze. The notes wrapped around her like ghosts. It was the lullaby, the one her mother used to sing, the one that only lived now in faded memory. Her hands trembled on the wheels of her chair. Nathaniel noticed immediately. "Are you all right?" She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes welled up, and before she could stop it, a tear rolled down her cheek, then another. Nathaniel stepped forward. He didn't say a word. He simply reached for her hand, slowly, carefully, like asking for permission without speaking. Their fingers touched. She didn't pull away. She let him hold her hand. They stood there together in the light of the tree, surrounded by laughter, music, and strangers who didn't know that something important had just happened. Not a kiss, not a confession, not even a promise, just a hand holding another, steady and sure. No words were spoken, but in that moment, his hand said more than 1,000 voices ever could, and it was warmer than any fire she had ever known. The days passed gently, as if time had agreed to slow down just for them. Annalise found herself settling into the rhythm of the house, not as a guest, not quite family, but something in between. She was quiet, thoughtful, always helping in small ways. She folded Susan's laundry, read bedtime stories when Nathaniel worked late, and rearranged the spice rack with a kind of quiet pride. But Nathaniel sensed something beneath her calm, something she carried like an invisible weight. One snowy evening, while Susan was asleep and the house was wrapped in silence, Nathaniel found Annalise sitting alone by the fireplace. She was staring into the flames, a sketch pad on her lap. "You used to draw?" he asked gently. Annalise didn't look at him. Her pencil moved slowly across the page. "I used to teach," she said after a moment. "Art at a public school in Brooklyn." He didn't speak, letting her decide what to share. "I started a mural project for underfunded schools," she continued. "I wanted the kids to see color, even if their lives felt gray." She turned the sketch pad toward him. On it was the rough outline of a mural, a garden of handprints turning into butterflies, bright, chaotic, full of joy. "That one was for a school in East Flatbush. The building was so run down, but the kids were—" Her voice broke off. Nathaniel leaned forward slightly. "What happened?" Annalise's eyes dropped to her lap. "There was an accident. A car jumped the curb one morning. One of my students was in the way. I pushed him out, but I didn't make it." Nathaniel's breath caught. "I woke up in the hospital. Couldn't feel my legs. Lost my job, lost my partner, and 6 months later my mother had a stroke." Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't dramatic, just tired. She looked at him then. "I don't tell you this to make you feel sorry. I just don't want to be someone you pity." "I don't," Nathaniel said. "I see you." She gave him a sad smile. "I'm not sure I even see myself anymore." The next morning, Nathaniel made a call, then another and another. He didn't tell her what he was doing. 3 days later, he stood across the street from a familiar building in Brooklyn. The school looked just as she had described: aged brick walls, iron gates, a playground in desperate need of repair. But the wall that once held her mural was still there. The colors had faded, the paint peeling. Someone had spray painted over part of it, but beneath the damage he saw it: the butterflies, the handprints, the joy. He hired a team of artists, gave them a photo Annalise had left in her sketchbook, and told them to restore every brushstroke exactly. At the end, he asked for one thing to be added: a small bronze plaque beneath the mural. "The heart that colored children's dreams, Miss A." He returned home the next day without a word. Later that week, Nathaniel handed her a folded paper. She opened it slowly, confused. Inside was a photograph of the restored mural, the colors vivid and alive again, the plaque shining under the winter sun. Her hand flew to her mouth. "You did this?" she whispered. He nodded once. "It should have never been forgotten." Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them, not from sadness, not even from gratitude, but from something deeper. Validation. After all these years, someone had remembered not what she lost, but who she had been. No one had looked at her that way in a long, long time, not as a burden, not as someone to fix, but as someone who once brought beauty into the world and still could. She held the photo to her chest and wept, quiet, cleansing tears that felt like the first step toward becoming whole again. For the first time in years, someone had remembered what she used to be, not just what she had lost. The letter arrived on a crisp January morning, slipped beneath the door in a plain white envelope. Annalise recognized the logo before she even opened it. She had written to the research hospital months ago, before she met Nathaniel, before she ever thought she'd stay. Inside, the words blurred as she read. "A full evaluation, experimental spinal procedure, covered entirely by grant funding. Travel and accommodation included. Must relocate for several months." Her heart pounded. It was everything she had hoped for once. She folded the letter and slid it beneath her pillow. She told no one. Not yet. That night, after Susan fell asleep curled beside her in the guest room, Annalise sat in silence, the envelope clutched in her hands. Her fingers trembled. She loved them more than she could admit. But she wasn't theirs. She didn't belong, and sooner or later that truth would hurt someone. She thought maybe if she left quietly, she could spare them. She began to pack just after dawn. She folded her clothes with slow, deliberate hands, took down the paper flowers Susan had taped to her headboard, picked up the silver bell from her wheelchair, and placed it gently in the side pocket of her bag. She zipped the suitcase halfway, then paused. From the doorway came a small voice. "Why are you packing?" Annalise turned, startled. Susan stood barefoot in her pajamas, hair tousled, holding her stuffed bunny by one ear. She faltered. "I have to go for a little while." Susan's eyes filled instantly. "You're leaving?" Her voice cracked. "But you're my snow fairy." Annalise knelt beside her, reaching for her hands. "Sweetheart, I'm not leaving because I want to. I have to. It's for something important." Susan yanked her hands away. "That's what Mommy said." Annalise froze. "She said she'd come back. But she didn't. And now you're doing the same thing." Annalise felt her chest cave in. "No, Susan. It's not the same." "Yes, it is," Susan shouted, then ran from the room. Annalise sat in stunned silence, her hands trembling in her lap. Downstairs, Nathaniel heard the commotion. He met Susan on the staircase, tears running down her face. She ran into his arms. "She's leaving," Susan sobbed. "Just like Mommy." He didn't ask questions. He didn't wait. He climbed the stairs two at a time, his jaw tight. When he reached the guest room, Annalise was sitting beside the half-packed suitcase, her eyes red. "You were going to leave?" His voice was low but shaking. "Without saying anything?" "I didn't want to make it harder," she whispered. "I didn't want to hurt her." Nathaniel stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "So instead you thought disappearing would hurt less?" "I got accepted into a program," she said, holding up the letter. "They might be able to help me walk again. It's in another state. I'd be gone for months." "I didn't think—" "No, you didn't," he snapped. She flinched. His voice rose, cracking. "Do you think this is easy for me? Do you think I just bring anyone into my daughter's life?" Tears welled in her eyes. "That's why I have to go. You've already lost someone. I lost the woman I loved because I wasn't brave enough to fight for her," Nathaniel said, louder now. "And I'm not letting that happen again." Annalise stared at him. His hands were clenched at his sides. "You think you're doing this to protect us? But the truth is you're scared. You don't believe you deserve this, any of it." He took a deep breath, voice shaking. "But you do. Damn it, Annalise. You do." She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. "You matter," he said, softer now. "Not because of what you've lost, but because of who you are. And we don't want a goodbye. We want you." For a moment, all she could do was breathe. And then she nodded, not a big dramatic gesture, just a small, almost imperceptible motion. But it said everything. She wasn't leaving. Not tonight. She thought leaving would protect them. She didn't realize she had already become the very thing that held them together. The suitcase remained under the bed, untouched. The letter from the out-of-state hospital sat folded inside a drawer, unread for days. And for the first time in a very long time, Annalise didn't feel like she was waiting for her life to begin somewhere else. She had chosen to stay. The morning after her decision, she met with a specialist at the local hospital. Nathaniel had arranged everything but said nothing about it, no offers of help, no discussion of cost, just quiet, unseen support. She learned about a new treatment, less invasive, longer-term therapy designed to restore strength and some mobility. The odds weren't guaranteed, but for Annalise, the possibility was enough. Each morning, she wheeled herself down the driveway to a waiting car. Each afternoon, she returned exhausted but hopeful. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fast. But it was real. One day, after a particularly difficult session, she returned home to find Susan sitting at the kitchen table, cutting colored paper with intense focus. "I made something for you," Susan said proudly, holding it out. "For being brave." Annalise took the paper badge and laughed. It was shaped like a snowflake, lopsided and glittery, with scribbled letters across the front: Snow Warrior, the bravest in the world. Annalise pinned it to her sweater and whispered, "I'll wear it forever." She meant it. That night she stepped out onto the porch for fresh air. The snow had started to melt. The wind was softer now. There was peace in the stillness, until she heard voices down the street. Curious, she wheeled herself slowly toward the corner and saw it. 2 news vans, a small crowd of reporters, and Nathaniel in the center, trying to move past them. "Mr. Rowan, is it true you turned down a merger worth $80 million? Are you stepping away from Rowan Global permanently? Is the mystery woman we've heard about the reason for your disappearance from the board?" Annalise froze. She had known Nathaniel was successful, but not like this. She watched from a distance as he brushed off the cameras and stepped into his car, his expression unreadable. She turned and wheeled herself back inside, heart pounding. The weight of it sank in. His world was polished, powerful, public, and hers wasn't. She stared at her reflection in the hallway mirror, the girl in the chair with tired eyes and a paper snowflake badge pinned to her chest. The question came, uninvited but undeniable, in his world, is there a place for someone like me? She had started to believe in healing, but some wounds whispered louder than others, especially the ones that said, "You don't belong." The hallway at the rehabilitation center was quiet, the only sound the soft squeak of rubber soles on polished tile. Annalise stood between parallel bars, sweat clinging to her temples, arms shaking from the strain. She had taken 4 steps that day, uneven, unsteady, but hers. And then, on the 5th, her knees buckled. The physical therapist reached to catch her, but someone else was already there. Nathaniel. He dropped to the floor beside her, arms strong and sure, cradling her gently. "I'm okay," she whispered, breathless, laughing through the exhaustion. "I fell, but I'm okay." Nathaniel didn't laugh. His gaze searched hers, as if he was looking for something deeper than pain or pride, as if he was seeing all of her, the courage, the fragility, the fire. He helped her back into her chair. Neither spoke much on the ride home. The snow had started falling again, quietly blanketing the streets like powdered sugar. That evening, he found her on the back patio, watching the flakes drift down beneath the soft glow of the string lights. "Come with me," he said gently. She followed him through the house, past the dining room, the study, and down a quiet hallway she had never seen before. He opened a door. Inside was a freshly painted room, walls the color of soft lilac, shelves lined with sketchbooks and new supplies, a wide window looking out into the woods. An easel stood in the corner, and above it, a small wooden plaque engraved with a single name, Annalise's Studio. She covered her mouth with her hands. Nathaniel handed her a rolled-up paper. She unrolled it slowly. It was the blueprint for the room, the notes in his handwriting, every detail thought through, every measurement precise. "I didn't want to ask you to stay," he said quietly. "Not like that. Not with a ring or a promise you're not ready for." He looked at her steady. "But I also couldn't stand the thought of you feeling like a guest here. This is your home, too, if you want it to be." Tears welled in her eyes. No declarations, no fairy tale lines, just a room, a place, a truth. He stepped closer, took her hands. "I don't want to rescue you, Annalise," he said. "I just want to stand beside you, wherever you are." And in the doorway of that little room, with snow falling outside and Christmas lights glowing behind them, Annalise leaned in. He met her halfway. Their first kiss was soft, no fanfare, no rush, just warmth meeting warmth in the quiet space where 2 broken hearts had finally found something whole. No one saved the other. They simply found each other at the moment their hearts needed it most. Snow blanketed the earth once again, falling softly like it had the year before. But this time, it didn't feel cold. It felt familiar, gentle, full of memory. A full year had passed. Annalise stood inside a cozy, sunlit classroom at the local community center, leaning slightly on her crutches. She moved slowly but confidently, no longer confined, no longer afraid. Children sat around her in a circle, their hands smudged with paint, their laughter bouncing off the walls. The room was filled with color, joy, and life. She had started the art program 2 months earlier, a free class for children with disabilities and those from underprivileged families. The supplies were donated, the space gifted, the support quietly arranged by Nathaniel. She had hesitated when he offered, but he simply said, "This is yours. I'm just standing behind you." As the class ended, Susan burst through the door, snowflakes clinging to her red coat and curls. "Hi, Mommy," she called out, running into Annalie's arms. Annalie smiled and pulled her close. "You're the girl with the snow heart," Susan whispered, "and the smile that melts the cold." That night, their home glowed with warmth and soft lights. The Christmas tree stood tall, waiting to be decorated. Annalise, Nathaniel, and Susan worked side by side, hanging ornaments, stringing lights, placing handmade snowflakes at the very top. When they finished, Nathaniel disappeared briefly, returning with a small velvet box in his hand. He didn't kneel. He just sat beside Annalise, opened the box, and revealed a vintage ring. "It was my mother's," he said. "She would have loved you." He took her hand. "This time," he whispered, "I'm not letting something good slip away." Annalise said nothing. She just smiled softly, surely, and nodded. Susan jumped into their arms with a squeal, wrapping them both in a hug. The winter that began with sorrow had ended with something far greater than hope. It ended with love, with home, with family. And that was Come With Me, the millionaire single dad who found a disabled girl crying in the snow. And everything changed that day. A story of second chances, quiet courage, and the kind of love that heals without needing to fix. If this story touched your heart, made you smile, or brought a tear to your eye, please don't forget to subscribe and hit that hype button to support the Soul-Stirring Stories channel. We bring you emotional, heartwarming tales that remind us all that even in the coldest seasons, love can still bloom. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.